Have you ever felt like you were talking to an empty room? That your prayers, your anxieties, your most sincere requests are nothing more than whispers lost in the wind? What if I told you that maybe, just maybe, this isn't a mistake of the universe, but your true nature? That it's not because you sinned, forgot to give thanks, or didn't use a condom, but because the God you imagine may not even exist in the way you were told. This idea, uncomfortable and liberating at the same time, was the trigger for the most daring theological demolition in modern philosophy. Spinoza, the man who dared to say that God doesn't care, and yet deserves to be loved. He was not an empty rebel, nor a raging atheist. On the contrary, Spinoza believed so much in God that he decided to rethink him from scratch. Stripped of mythologies, dogmas, or hierarchies, he saw the divine not as an entity with a will, but as the very structure of existence. God, for him, is everything that exists: the laws of physics, the logic behind biology, the invisible code that moves reality. And that changes everything. Because if God is nature itself, it makes no sense to pray for favors. There are no ears in the cosmos. There are only causes and effects. Most of us live as if we were in a queue for heavenly service, waiting for luck to change, for love to arrive, for suffering to end. But Spinoza says this is not faith, it is bargaining. And bargaining with the universe is useless. It does not negotiate. It simply works. Harsh, perhaps. But it is from this harshness that a new form of freedom is born. The freedom to stop begging for miracles and start understanding the mechanics that govern our pain. This video is about that. About a philosopher exiled from his own culture for thinking too much. About the courage to be lucid in a world that prefers miracles to manuals. About the pain of being rejected for speaking the truth, and the beauty of finding meaning in this chaos anyway. Throughout this journey, you will find no promises. You will find clarity. And if you have the courage to follow through to the end, you may realize that the deepest faith is not in what we ask of the heavens, but in the silence we accept within ourselves when we finally understand how things are. Nowadays, being canceled on social media has become almost a rite of passage. You say something you shouldn't, someone cuts it out, it goes viral. Half the internet crucifies you, and the next day you come back with a generic apology. But Baruch Spinoza was canceled in a way that would make any influencer beg for mercy. In 1656, at the age of 23, he was excommunicated from the Jewish community of Amsterdam with frightening severity. It wasn't a simple, "don't come to synagogue anymore." It was a religious sentence that cursed him at dawn, at dusk, at home, on the street, in life, and in death. The list of curses seemed to have been written by an apocalypse screenwriter. It was like being deleted from one's own identity. And the reason? Spinoza dared to think. He dared to question the image of God as a heavenly judge who rewards the good and punishes the bad. He questioned the literal reading of the scriptures and proposed a more rational and impersonal view of the divine. He said that God is not an old man with a beard in the sky, but nature itself, the structure of reality. His ideas were so dangerous that, even though they were written in Latin, accessible only to intellectuals, they caused panic among religious leaders. They feared that this clarity would contaminate the rest of the community, already vulnerable under the eyes of the dominant Christian culture. Imagine, you in your early 20s, being banished from your home, your faith, your culture, for not agreeing with comfortable narratives. And most impressive of all, he did not back down. He did not write a retraction. He did not try to negotiate his return. He refused all offers to remain silent or soften his views. He preferred exile to lying. He preferred the solitude of truth to the applause of convenience. And therein lies Spinoza's true strength. His courage was philosophical, yes, but also existential. He reminds us that the worst form of cancellation does not come from outside, but from within, when we betray ourselves to fit in. Spinoza chose not to fit in. He chose to live on the margins, where few have the courage to stay. And it is from these margins that he built a body of thought capable of spanning centuries, even if in silence. Because while the crowd cries out for acceptance, he invites us to resist with reason, with courage, with the dignity of those who think through to the ultimate consequences. Have you ever tried praying for your bills to disappear, for your crush to text you, or for the universe to reward you just for being good? Yeah. Spinoza, from the height of his brutal lucidity, would observe all of this with merciless serenity, not out of contempt, but because he knows what many refuse to admit. Praying for an answer is like sending an email to gravity, asking for a discount on the fall. For him, it's not that God doesn't hear. It's that God simply has no ears. This idea seems cold, even cruel, but it is liberating, because Spinoza did not believe in a personal God concerned with our daily dramas. God for him was the very structure of existence, not a cosmic manager who evaluates requests, but the system itself at work. Physics, chemistry, biology, the invisible logic that governs everything. Asking God to change reality in our favor would be like expecting the ocean to change its salt content because someone doesn't like the taste. Prayer, in this context, becomes a childish attempt to negotiate with immutable laws. But Spinoza was not a nihilist. He believed deeply in the possibility of redemption, not through miracles, but through understanding. True prayer, according to him, is understanding. Observe, reflect, seek the causes and connections that govern what happens to us. When we suffer, it is not because we have been abandoned by a higher being. It is because we do not yet understand the chain of causes that brought us here. And that ignorance is what amplifies the pain. For Spinoza, spiritual maturity is when you stop asking the universe to favor you and start studying the universe as it is. Replace the altar with the library, clamor with logic, despair with understanding. He does not deny pain. He only rejects useless drama, because suffering without understanding is like screaming in the dark. But when you turn on the light of reason, even if the pain remains, it takes shape, it fits, it becomes learning. Perhaps that is why his ideas still bother us so much, because they pull us out of the comfort of magical faith and throw us into the abyss of responsibility. And in that abyss, there are no promises of a happy ending, but there is an immense possibility of clarity. And clarity in this chaotic world may be the closest we get to peace. Spinoza's faith is not devotional, it is rational. It is the faith of those who accept that the cosmos does not respond, but reveals itself to those who are willing to understand. Have you ever felt dragged through life like a dog being pulled into the bath, trying to resist something that is already decided? This simple metaphor accurately illustrates one of Spinoza's greatest philosophical contributions, the idea that resisting the inevitable only increases the pain, and he was not alone. His thinking dialogues with another giant of the human soul, Seneca, the Stoic poet who taught that wisdom lies in accepting what cannot be controlled. Spinoza drank from this source and went a step further. He not only accepted that the world follows a flow, but said that this flow is God in motion. God not as judge, but as necessity. In his view, everything that happens because it could not be otherwise. There is no such thing as chance, divine punishment, or cosmic privilege. The universe follows impersonal laws, and we are part of them. When you lose your job, get dumped, or go through a crisis, it's not because the universe has singled you out. It's because previous causes, many invisible to your eyes, have unfolded to that point. The sense of injustice stems from our childish desire to be the center of the plot. But Spinoza offers an alternative path. He proposes that freedom is not doing what you want, but understanding why you want what you do. Freedom is when you understand the forces that move you and, instead of resisting, walk with them. And this understanding does not come from blind faith or denial. It comes from careful observation, investigation of causes, and the effort to think clearly. This stance requires courage. It requires abandoning the illusion of absolute control and accepting the humility of being part of something bigger. But it also offers real freedom, not the kind that depends on circumstances, but the kind that comes from lucidity. When you understand what drives you, you can use that force to your advantage. When you understand the leash, you stop struggling and start walking. And that changes everything, because pain is no longer an enemy to be defeated, but a sign to be interpreted. Loss is no longer a tragedy, but a transition. Chaos reveals itself as order not yet understood. Spinoza does not want you to be passive in the face of life. He wants you to be a lucid strategist, someone who transforms understanding into intelligent action. Because life will pull you down. There's no doubt about that. But understanding why and where to is what transforms the drag into a conscious walk. You know when everything seems to fall apart at once? Your credit card is maxed out, your boss is freaking out, your dog destroyed the remote, and you start to feel like life has become a coordinated attack on your emotional balance. At times like these, most people plunge into despair as if they were living the dramatic finale of a cosmic soap opera. But Spinoza, with his almost surgical coldness, would raise an eyebrow and say, "You're looking at it from the wrong place." Because according to him, there is a short-sighted way and a wise way of looking at reality. The first is that of the majority, the perspective of time, immediate, impulsive, drowned in the now. Everything seems urgent. Everything seems like the end of the world. In the logic of time, a breakup is an emotional failure. A resignation is a sentence of failure. And an overdue bill is an existential threat. But Spinoza invites us to change our angle. He calls this subspecie aeternitatis, the perspective of eternity. This is not cheap mysticism. It's a rational attempt to view life with detachment, to see yourself as part of a larger whole, where events cease to be personal tragedies and become natural movements of a much broader system. When you start thinking like this, you realize that the universe is not against you. It simply is. And everything that happens, pain, mistakes, loss, is not a personal attack, but a necessary fragment of a whole that does not revolve around you. At first this hurts. It hurts because it dismantles the drama. It hurts because it forces us to step out of the role of victim. But this pain makes room for something rare and precious: clarity. From the perspective of eternity, you begin to react less and reflect more. You understand that suffering has context, that loss has a function, that instability is part of the flow, and above all, you realize that you are not the center, but a link, and that doesn't diminish your importance. On the contrary, it broadens your awareness. It gives you a peace that doesn't come from control, but from understanding. And when you understand, despair loses its power. The scream turns into silence. Chaos turns into rhythm. Spinoza didn't want us to live anesthetized. He wanted us to learn to see with broader eyes. And when you start doing that, you discover that many of the pains that crushed you only seemed big because you were looking too closely. Stepping back, zooming out, is the most mature act one can take. And maybe, just maybe, that's what he meant when he spoke of eternity. Seeing life with the wisdom of someone who no longer needs immediate answers to accept what is. You can write one of the most powerful books in history, filled with ideas capable of liberating millions of minds, and still be ignored. Spinoza did that. He gave the world ethics, a masterpiece of rational philosophy, where God is not a magician, but the very logic of reality. But unlike religious texts that have become tattoos, TV series, and t-shirt slogans, his book was relegated to the dusty shelves of universities. And the reason was not its complexity. It was its emotional coldness, its overconfidence in reason. Spinoza forgot that human beings need more than truths. They need beauty. They need music, symbols, wine, and stories with comforting endings, even if they are illusory. While he offered clarity, religion offered belonging. While he gave us logic, traditional faith gave us a hug. And that carries weight. Because deep down, no one wants to just understand. They want to feel that they belong, that they are welcome, that they are part of something bigger than the incident report of existence. Ethics does not fill temples because it is too sincere, because it doesn't promise the impossible. It doesn't tell you that everything will work out, but teaches you to understand why things are the way they are. And this sincerity, though rare, is frightening. Spinoza was an engineer trying to explain the trick in a world that prefers enchantment. And because of this, his work remained in the dark, where ideas that don't promise miracles but deliver freedom rest. But maybe it's time to reverse that. Maybe what's missing isn't magic, but the courage to face reality with maturity. Maybe what frees us isn't another prayer, but the silence that comes after understanding. And if that made sense to you, if at any point in this video you felt something move inside you, then leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to go further, consider supporting this work with any amount. Your support strengthens this project and allows reflections like this to reach more people in more places, in an increasingly noisy world, thirsty for lucidity. The clarity that Spinoza offered does not fill temples, but it can illuminate consciences. And that, in the end, is what matters most.